The Indian War of Independence, 1857 to 1858. The Indian War of Independence that took place in India during 1857 to 1858 was one of the most powerful rebellions against colonial power during the 1800s. Although the rebellion was unsuccessful and they didn't get independence, it gave hope to the Indians that they could get independence one day. And secondly, if they wanted independence, they would need to be better organized. The British involvement started when they wanted to trade with the Indians, as they had many valuable and rare goods of those times, like spices and other delicacies. So to execute this, the British East India Company was created. Initially, they set up trading posts in only Kolkata, Mumbai, and Chennai, but its charter, which had been given by the British government, allowed them to stage war if they needed to. The British East India Company wanted to protect its Indian goods, so they formed an army. Later, through conquest, large parts of India were owned by the British East India Company, which gave them wealth and also a lot of power. The British started recruiting Indian soldiers as it needed a large number to maintain its conquests. These armies consisted majorly of Indian soldiers, and British soldiers were a minority. The Indian soldiers that were under the British East India Company armies were called sepoys. Initially, the sepoys were fine with the British officers. Over the course of time, their feelings for the British officers changed. Major army positions were reserved only for the British, and sepoys were given poor pay. To add fuel to the fire, the officers had introduced the Enfield rifle, which had cartridges whose paper was greased with pig or cow fat. To load the rifle, they were required to bite off the greased cartridge, which went against religious habits. And because of all of this, the sepoys got angry, and then in March 29th, 1857, Sepoy Mangal Pandey wounded and killed several officers at Barrackpore. To stop him, British officers ran towards Mangal Pandey, so Mangal Pandey shot himself in the chest, but his suicide attempt was unsuccessful. He faced a trial, was found guilty, and executed. That execution would create more unrest in the sepoys. After careful planning on May 10th, sepoys of the Bengal White Cavalry rescued 85 of their imprisoned fellow sepoys in Meerut, who had refused to use the Enfield's cartridges. While they were there, they killed all the British they found. From there, they marched to Delhi, where they met other rebel sepoys and started killing the British. Delhi receives independence, and Lal Bahadur Shah Zafar is raised to the throne as Emperor of Delhi. The British troops in the area were minimal, so the British troops were unable to make an immediate counterattack. A month later, 4,000 British troops successfully captured locations outside of Delhi, but still they were no match for the 30,000 sepoys inside Delhi's walls. Left with no option, the British forces had to withstand regular attacks during the hot summer months. In September, the British troops got 5,000 extra troops and reinforcements and bombarded Delhi, causing the Kashmir Gate to be destroyed. It was only after a week later that the rebel sepoys were suppressed and Delhi was re-annexed by colonial rule. About the same period as the conflicts at Delhi, at Kanpur, the British station was ambushed by local sepoys, freeing Kanpur from colonial hands and forcing Sir Hugh Wheeler and his 1,000 men to be besieged starting June 6th. Nana Sahib, the rebellion leader at Kanpur, offers an escape route to the British forces on the 25th of June. But as planned, Kanpur rebel forces attacked Sir Hugh Wheeler and his men as they boarded the boats which they thought would take them to safety. The next day, a relief force under the command of Sir Henry Havelock had come to Kanpur. Havelock's troops killed many civilians in Kanpur and hanged thousands of suspected mutineers without trial. In November, Kanpur fell back into British hands, but the sepoys managed to retake it. In December, it was re-annexed by the British. A month after Kanpur conflict started, on May 30th, 1857, Lucknow was the site of yet another mutiny. Sir Henry Lawrence, the head officer at Lucknow, had heard about other areas dealing with the mutiny, so he had taken a few steps to reinforce the city. But as he was heavily outnumbered, he and his army and the civilians had been taken to refuge at the Lucknow Residency, where they were besieged until November, when a relief force had come to attack the rebel forces. Unfortunately for Lawrence, he didn't get to see that as he had died from an explosion from a shell in his room. It was only in March of 1858 that Lucknow had been re-annexed by colonial power. The ending stages of the war had taken place mostly in Jhansi, which was under the control of Rani Lakshmi Bai, the Queen of Jhansi. Rani Lakshmi Bai supported the sepoys and was angry that the British had annexed Jhansi, so she decided to lead the rebel forces in Jhansi. So in June of 1857, local sepoy forces rebelled, hoping to free Jhansi. In March of 1858, British forces under the command of Sir Hugh Rose marched onto the city, putting Jhansi on siege. Capturing Jhansi was a tough task as Rani Lakshmi Bai and her forces were determined to get independence. The siege was as long as 2 weeks when finally British forces stormed the city walls. A few days later, Jhansi was put fully under British control. A huge population of Jhansi inhabitants had been murdered by the British troops. Luckily, Rani Lakshmi Bai had managed to escape from the savagery of the British. On June 1858, at Kota Ki Sarai, Gwalior, during a skirmish against British forces, Rani Lakshmi Bai's maid had died, so to avenge her death, she went on a rampage on her horse. This wasn't the horse she used to have, and when she told it to jump, it didn't, and she got cut in the face with the British sword. Realizing that those were her last moments, she managed to kill her killer. The very last of battles were at Gwalior, whose rebel troops were led by Tadia Tope. Despite having last-minute minor victories, it is said that the 1857 War of Independence ended here. 20 years after the War of Independence, the British East India Company had come to an end, and India was put under British imperial rule. From here on, a new generation of freedom fighters had come about, who would successfully declare independence from the colonial power on August 15th, 1947, 90 years later.